Hey, it's Jeff Zito, and thank you for checking out another episode of Celebrity Jobber. It's the podcast where we talk to celebrities and basically find out what happened. What was their big break? What shot them to stardom? What was it? And if that big break didn't happen, maybe what would you be doing? What was your first job? You know, if that big break never happened to some people, who knows? They could have been in a completely different profession, and instead of being a big star on TV or a rock star, musician, comedian, they might be selling insurance somewhere or have an upholstery business. My guest this week is Turtle from one of the greatest shows ever on HBO, Entourage. Was Jerry Ferrara an actor? Was his path, in life to become an actor? Did he go to school for it? Is he trained? Was he just a neighborhood guy from New York who was plucked off the street and put in this very popular HBO show, Entourage? What was Jerry's first job? What would Jerry be doing if he wasn't Turtle on Entourage? And what's he doing these days? We're going to find out. His name is Jerry Ferrara, and he's my guest this week on Celebrity Jobber.
The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. If you like what you hear, please subscribe. What if these celebrities weren't famous? What would they have become? What was their first job? We're about to find out.
How's it going?
Bro, how are you, man?
I'm doing great, man. I really am. It's also the first day of school for my kids, so I'm doing even better now.
Oh, yeah, I bet you are. Well, I'm a big fan of Entourage, and I was listening to, the trailer for your new podcast, Throwbacks, with Matt Leinart, and he jokingly, playfully called you Turtle. Does that happen a lot to you?
It certainly does. Definitely a lot more, when the show was on the air and kind of in its height, it certainly was apparent. I think now, I've been at this 25 years. I think it's like a balance of some people will call me Turtle, some people call me Jerry, and then some people know me more from Power these days and call me Joe Proctor.
Right.
So
right.
It's a mixed bag. You never quite know what you're going to get when you step out of the house, but I've always had fun with it because it really is, it's given me so much. So I've tried to give it back as much as I could.
So, Jerry, during the show, you weighed a lot more. You dropped a lot of weight. So probably they don't recognize you maybe as much anymore these days. And how did you drop the weight, by the way?
Yeah, it's so funny you say that, Jeff, because nowadays, and even when I started losing weight toward the end of the show, I lost about 60 pounds over time. I'm not a very tall guy as well, so once I hit 200 pounds at like 5'6", it wasn't even so much I need to look better, it was I need to feel better. But nowadays, and even as I got into shape, it just started becoming, hey, you look just like that guy.
Right.
He's really overweight, so it can't be you.
Right.
So I don't not know what to say in those situations. As far as the weight loss journey, and it was a journey, and it was one of the hardest things I ever had to do. So anybody listening to this, if you're in it and trying to do it, or if you've done it, or if you're even thinking about doing it, I know how hard it is. Just know the results on the other side are far, far greater than whatever it is that you're giving up at the moment. So, for me, it was slow. I didn't do any crash diet or anything severe. I just ate better. I mean, when I first started working out, I could walk on the treadmill like a mile,
right,
like 3.5. So I started just doing that, and by the end, I was running 10 miles on the treadmill.
Wow.
So that's kind of been my journey to this point.
Well, let's get into a little bit about your background. I want to know, you're from New York, born and raised, and your family not in showbiz, right? Your mom, your dad, what do they do for work? Yeah,
so no, I grew up in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn in the 90s. Acting and show business was not a typical career path for a 17, 18-year-old person at all. Even though we had New York City and Broadway, Brooklyn was like another world compared to Manhattan, and I was not like a theater kid growing up.
Right.
I came to acting through a love of television and film. I loved watching and going to movies. It kept me out of trouble. As far as like my parents, my father, unfortunately, he passed away when I was 5 years old, so I was raised by a single mother. I have an older brother. So we were a family of three, and my mom, after my dad passed all those years, she became a school crossing guard because that kind of mirrored our hours at school. You know, she would drop us off at school. She'd go cross the kids at school. Then she'd have this long break at home while we were there. And then we'd get out of school and she'd cross the kids safely and she'd pick us up and take us home. So, but she did instill in me at a very early age that, like, you could do anything in this world just as long as you really try and not just think it's expected to happen to you. And I believed her.
Jerry, it sounds so cliche, you know, like you can do anything you want as long as you put your mind to it. But it is so true, isn't it, man?
It really is. It's even like the same thing I was talking about with the weight loss. It's like, look, first and foremost, you'll never know unless you try. The keys for me are always don't be afraid to fail, because failing is not really as bad as you think it is. It's really just a lesson if you keep it in perspective. And yeah, I really do think that if you set up for the long haul and not just, and we all look for short-term success. And even now, I think it's even quicker with social media and everything. We're all looking for fast gains in a short amount of time. But anything that's worth it and anything worthwhile, especially in the career sense, it's a slow grind. You just got to be in it for the long haul.
So, Jerry, what was your first job before you got into show business, before the podcast with Matt Leinart, which I want to get to in a little bit? What was your first job at a show, like very first job, whatever it was?
So in Brooklyn, my first job was I was like a delivery boy for the local pharmacy, right?
Okay.
I helped stock the shelves and I worked the register and I delivered people all their medicine. As I started getting ready to save up some money to move to LA, I did everything. But I sold Christmas trees in the winter, which is a big business in New York. I had a snow shoveling business. Like if we got a big snowstorm, I ring your bell, hey, $20, I'll shovel your steps and shovel your car out. I hustled. And then when I moved to LA, before I started really working as an actor, I typically worked in every restaurant in the San Fernando Valley, which is a very typical career choice for actors, to the point where when I even got the pilot for Entourage, we had not been picked up yet. I kept my job at the restaurant, like just in case.
Right. So what do you think, Jerry? I mean, you're studying, you know, to be an actor in high school. And then, I mean, it's a big dream. You got to admit, it's a big dream. Did you have like a fail-safe? Did you have a backup plan? Like, what did you think you would do with your life if you didn't get your, you know, big break?
Listen, honestly, Jeff, it's the benefit of being young.
Right.
This is what I would tell any young person. I did not have a backup plan at all, which, when you're 19, 20 years old, is not the worst thing in the world. You know, I wasn't married. I had no kids. I only had to worry about myself. I guess my backup plan was just, hey, like I could make enough money as a server at the restaurant to pay the rent on this small apartment and get a very, very realistic car. That's as far as I was able to think at that point. I know I mentioned like long-term goals. I do think long-term with career, but just as far as like finances and where I want to be in 20 years, I don't really ever think like that. I didn't have a backup plan, if I'm being honest.
Wow.
I'm not advising anyone to not have one, but I dropped out of college. I was kind of all in with this. And yeah, it's not necessarily the safest choice, but I guess my backup plan was like I just stay in the restaurant because I know I could have an apartment and a car that's like affordable.
The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito.
Well, like you just said, though, it's like it's the advantages of being young. You know, you're all in, and
right.
that's how you do it. What about? I mean, I would imagine when asking you what was it that changed your life forever, your big break, if you will, I would have to say it would be Entourage. But maybe there was something before that kind of changed for you. Was there something that got you to, you know, your life changed because of some situation or circumstance?
So, yeah, look, Entourage for sure is the thing. All right. Like it's the biggest thing at that point that I had done. And some may even say it's still to this day the biggest thing I've done in my career. But, you know, other people could dispute that, you know, but I will trace it back to the things that led me to Entourage, which was not, you know, there's small things. And that's what I try to remind people too. It's like, I think people get opportunities all the time. They just don't realize their opportunities, or they aren't aware of it, because little tiny things could lead to the big thing. So for me, I was cast in this show for MTV back when MTV was doing scripted content, and the show didn't get picked up. So that's it. Like usually when that happens, you go back to the restaurant and you start again.
Right.
But I had remained friends with the people who were cast, and more importantly, with the writer-director of that show. It was actually a great cast, too. Max Greenfield from New Girl and The Neighborhood. James Badell has been in like hundreds of movies. Great cast. And the writer-director didn't want to let it die. So he decided to take that 30-minute show and make it into a 90-minute independent film, and he raised some money, and we all went back to New York and shot it. And that movie did very well at festivals, and it was that movie that led me to Entourage. Wahlberg and Steve Levinson saw me in that, and, you know, they didn't give me the part, but that's what they did to recruit me to start auditioning for Entourage. So, you know, it really was like a persistence thing, and also just I went where the passion was. So that, to me, was really the break. Doing that independent movie called Cross Bronx was the thing that led me to Entourage, for sure.
And I know that, I mean, I used to listen to the Victory, the podcast. They don't have it on anymore. And I'd hear you on occasionally. And I know that Doug Ellen, the creator of Entourage, was, you know, planning to do another show, like a spinoff maybe called Ramble On. I don't know where that is. And I think that you had a little role in that. But is there something Entourage related that may happen, that we may see you in coming up in, I don't know, want to say the near future, but anytime in the future? I'm one of those Entourage fans that don't want to let it go.
Yeah, Victory, the podcast is great, was great. I don't know if they're ever going to bring that back. Matt Leinart and I, when we talk about throwbacks, we'll talk a lot about Entourage as well, not in the same way that Victory did, but that's a great show. You know, look, it's the 20-year anniversary just passed in July, so we were all together quite often earlier parts of the year, and we definitely felt the vibe. They're just still so strong. Like, those guys are my brothers, you know. I never say never, because this talk always kicks up around the summer, because Entourage is such a summer show. It really would come down to Doug a lot to figure out what the show looks like now, because look, let's be honest, it's a very different show.
Yep.
Just in the fact that, you know, Vincent Chase is a movie star, and I don't know, people don't run out the front door to the movies anymore in the same way, even though the box office did finish very strongly this year in the summer. So I do think it could be interesting to kind of do the then and now, what the business was like then versus what it would be like now.
Very interesting.
I never say never. There's no immediate plan, but honestly, all it takes is one person going, yeah, let's do it. And it's on.
It's on. All right. So let's talk about your new endeavor. I know you got the podcast bug, because I would listen to you on Victory, the podcast, and you would start, you know, you're starting your own podcast, and now you have one with former Heisman Trophy winner, Matt Leinart. First of all, how did you meet him, and how was this new podcast, Throwbacks, born?
Yeah, it's a great story. You know, I actually was doing podcasts long before the Victory podcast. I started in 2012 with my wife. We started a podcast called Bad for Business, which the whole premise was, is it bad for business to basically start a business with your significant other? It wasn't, because we're married all these years later and we have 2 beautiful children. So I used to have to I used to get Kevin Connolly and Doug on my podcast. I showed them what podcasts were.
Wow.
So I've always loved space. I've always loved it. I've always had a love for radio and sports talk radio and talk radio in general. So I wanted to get back in, and we basically were going to start this sports show. And then when names started popping up of who the co-host would be, when Matt's name came up, I immediately was like, done. That's the guy. You know, Matt was running around LA the same time I was. He was at USC winning the Heisman right when Entourage started. We could have easily been friends back then. So you cut to 20 years later. I always say, too, Jeff, it's so hard to make friends like a little later in life, whether it's because you're busy or you got kids or your circle is just closed.
Yeah.
This is like a cheat code for me to make a new best friend. And Matt Leinart is, like I said, you know, he could have easily been a cameo in Entourage over the years. He's and he does great stuff in the college football space. So it was just a natural fit for Matt and I to do this.
All right. It's called Throwbacks, and I know it starts in a couple of days. It's going to be sports. It's going to be pop culture. It's going to be like a show. It's not going to be too heavy in one specific area. Right, Jerry?
Yeah. Very well rounded. It's impossible for us to not talk about our wife and kids and our families, because we're both family guys, but also Matt has a great interest in what I do. And we're also going to have we have some pretty good contacts, him and I. So we already have a great guest lined up for Thursday's show, which I want to tell you about, but they asked me not to reveal it yet. So, but it's going to be a good one.
All right, Jerry. And I just got to say, I mean, I know you guys are, probably just meeting, you're just becoming friends, but in the world of radio and podcast, you got to hit them with what everybody wants to know. So I hope there's some kind of Paris Hilton question that comes out somewhere down the line when you guys feel more comfortable with each other.
Listen, we agreed early on. We're not really holding back. Obviously, we're not trying to, get anyone in trouble or anything. But we're not holding back here. Also, that's the good thing about 20 years going by since Matt Heisman and since Entourage started. It's like now we look back at these things and they're just stories. Enough time has passed that we could go down the road of some of the things that maybe we wouldn't have talked about 10 years ago.
Man, I'm so happy I got a chance to talk to you. Throwbacks is the name of the new podcast. Jerry Ferrara from Entourage. He is Turtle and our guest right here on Celebrity Jobber. Great talking to you, man. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you. Thank you. We'll talk again for sure.
Man, Jerry was a hustler. He sold Christmas trees. He had a snow shoveling business, but his very first job ever was working at a pharmacy where he would stock shelves and deliver medicine to people in the area. Grew up in Brooklyn without a dad who passed away when he was 5 years old. His mother, kind of the rock of the family. She was a school crossing guard, so her day kind of lined up with the kids' day, and she could be with the kids, and it really, really great story. When I asked Jerry what his backup plan was, he said pretty much the convenience, of being young, You're not thinking of a backup plan. You're not thinking about the rest of your life. You're not thinking about saving money and having a family. You're not thinking about anything smart when you're young. So when, you are that age chasing a dream, it's pretty cool because you're all in and there is no backup plan. And that's where Jerry was. But he said, probably if it didn't work out, he'd just go back to working in the restaurants, being a waiter, making money, figuring it out, pay his bills, pay his rent. So a really cool part of the interview where, I ask what your big break is. And, a lot of people, it's obvious. And for Jerry, I would say Entourage, becoming Turtle in one of the greatest shows ever on HBO, my favorite TV show, next to Seinfeld, Entourage. And I would imagine getting the role of Turtle on Entourage, Jerry's big break. And he says, yes, he agrees. But he also kind of rewinds a little bit. And he goes, look, I kind of was cast for this show on MTV when they were doing scripted television back in the early 2000s. And it didn't work out. But the writer / director didn't want to let it go. So they made that show that they shot the pilot for MTV. They made it into an independent film, a 90-minute independent film. It did well in the film festivals, and that's where Mark Wahlberg and his partner, who came up with Entourage, saw Turtle, saw Jerry in the movie, and recruited him and told him to try out for Entourage, and there you go. I thought that was a really cool story. I had no idea. Don't forget, you can check out Jerry's new podcast with Matt Leinart, former USC quarterback, former Heisman Trophy winner. It's called Throwbacks. That's available wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, this podcast. Thank you so much for listening to Celebrity Jobber. And yes, you can stream on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please subscribe. Would love a 5-star rating, and please leave a review. Check out past episodes up on CelebrityJobber.com. You can follow on Instagram, CelebrityJobber_podcast, or YouTube.com/@CelebrityJobber. So if Jerry didn't make it in acting, not sure he would be a waiter. Who knows? I think Jerry has a lot of hustle in him. He would have probably been successful doing whatever he was doing. So that'll do it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening. And until next week, I'm Jeff Zito.